Boston, good defense by Lloyd. And now Mitchell gets around Asia and drew the foul. They just couldn't get it to fall.
Caitlin Clark's injury this season has done more than just sideline one of the most electrifying young stars in the WNBA. It has ripped the lid off a simmering league-wide problem that insiders like Skip Bayless, Erica Ayala, and Lisa Leslie say has been hiding in plain sight for years. When Clark went down with what became her third soft tissue injury in less than 3 months, it shocked fans not just because of her absence, but because Clark had no real history of injury issues, going back to her high school days. This wasn't the story of a fragile player. This was the story of an elite athlete suddenly breaking down under a system that might be pushing its stars beyond their physical limits. The Indiana Fever were already carrying the weight of expectations, and head coach Stephanie White faced immediate heat for what critics saw as mismanagement of Clark's minutes and workload. Fans, now deprived of the league's biggest draw for 15 games, began digging for answers, and what they found sparked a conversation that extended far beyond Indianapolis. Viewership numbers told part of the story. After Clark's injury, national ratings dipped sharply, in some cases dropping by more than 50% from earlier in the season. Proof of how much the league's current visibility is tied to her star power. CBS sports analyst Erica Ayala summed it up on the We Need to Talk podcast, explaining that whenever Clark is involved, the conversation inevitably grows bigger, touching on systemic issues that the league has yet to fully address. She raised the uncomfortable question of whether the grueling schedule, coupled with the league's expansion priorities, is actually harming players. The WNBA has been vocal about adding new franchises, but Ayala and others have argued that what's really needed first is an expansion of roster sizes, which would allow teams to better manage player minutes and reduce the risk of overuse injuries. That sentiment was echoed by players like Satu Sabli, who bluntly stated, "We had 9 games in 18 days. That's not really responsible for a commissioner," highlighting that recovery windows are shrinking even as the physical demands increase. And Clark is hardly alone in the injury report this season. Other high-profile players like Kayla Thornton, Breena Stewart, Ryan Howard, Paige Buchers, and Teosha Harris have all missed significant time, with several of those absences coming without a clear recovery timeline. Thornton's case has been particularly painful for Dallas fans, as she's been sidelined during what was shaping up to be her career best season. Even legends like Lisa Leslie have stepped into the debate, warning that injuries like Clark's require genuine rest and recovery, something the current schedule barely allows. The problem, critics say, is structural. While the league is excited about the idea of adding more teams, that growth brings an even more condensed calendar, more travel, and more games crammed into tight windows, all while most rosters remain capped at 11 or 12 players. The result is that stars are forced to play heavy minutes in nearly every contest, often without adequate rest days, and the war on tear is starting to show. Alicia J. brought some hard numbers into the conversation, noting that since 2019, the number of WNBA games has increased by 29%, but the length of the season has only been extended by 10 days, meaning players are packing more basketball into nearly the same time frame. Back in 2019, teams played over 108 days. Now it's 118, but the schedule is still brutal, with stretches like the ones Sabli described becoming more common. Factor in travel fatigue, especially with the league's still improving charter flight situation, and it's not hard to see why soft tissue injuries, stress-related issues, and overuse problems are piling up. Clark's situation has now become a rallying point, not only because of her impact on viewership, but because she represents the kind of marketable, generational talent the WNBA simply can't afford to burn out. For years, the league has wanted to seize the national spotlight, and with Clark, it finally has a player who draws crossover attention, pulls in casual sports fans, and trends online after nearly every game. But with that visibility comes a responsibility to protect the investment, not just in Clark, but in all of the league's stars. Right now, the conversation among insiders is less about whether Clark will come back at full strength this season, and more about whether the league is willing to make the systemic changes necessary to prevent this from becoming a recurring storyline. That means rethinking expansion timelines, committing to deeper rosters, giving coaches flexibility to rest stars without tanking their team's competitiveness, and building in more recovery days into the schedule. Until then, the WNBA risks repeating this cycle, pushing players to the breaking point. Watching injuries derail not just individual careers but the league's momentum, and leaving fans wondering if the system is built to sustain the stars it so heavily promotes. Clark's injury, while devastating for the Fever's playoff hopes, might be the wake-up call. The league needs to take these concerns seriously before the next wave of superstars faces the same fate.
Engsler off the screen from Melbourne, gets that to go, answers back. Iriafen picks up her second foul. This is the Mystics' first.
The conversation around Caitlin Clark's injury has now evolved into a bigger discussion about the WNBA's entire scheduling model, roster limitations, and whether the league's rapid growth is coming at the expense of player health. To put it into perspective, even before Clark went down for an extended stretch, league insiders were pointing to some worrying numbers. Back in 2021, the average number of days between WNBA games for a team was 4, giving players a reasonable buffer for recovery, practice, and travel. Fast forward to 2025, and despite the number of games in the season increasing by 29% since 2019, the league has only lengthened the season by 10 days. From 108 days in 2019 to 118 days now. That means more games are being crammed into nearly the same time frame, creating a grueling pace that inevitably wears players down. The league's push for growth, adding more teams, expanding television coverage, increasing national visibility, is understandable. But when your biggest names are missing extended time due to injuries, it's a sign that something deeper needs rethinking. Clark's absence has been the most visible example, but she's far from alone. Around the league, we've seen high-profile absences from stars like Kayla Thornton, Breena Stewart, Rhyne Howard, Paige Buchers, and Tiasha Harris, some of whom have missed games without a clear timeline for return. These aren't fringe players, these are cornerstone talents. The very athletes the league markets and relies on to sell tickets, drive TV ratings, and inspire the next generation of fans. Yet with the WNBA's tight schedule and small roster sizes, often just 11 or 12 players, there's little room for teams to rest their stars without putting strain on everyone else. In Clark's case, this was her third soft tissue injury in less than 3 months. A worrying trend for someone with no major injury history going back to her high school sophomore year. For Indiana Fever head coach Stephanie White, the challenge wasn't just figuring out how to replace Clark's scoring and playmaking, but how to keep the team competitive in the midst of roster instability. The Fever had entered the season with high hopes after retaining their core and signing veteran free agents like Natasha Howard and DeWanna Bonner, with many expecting them to make a strong playoff push from the jump. Instead, the year quickly turned turbulent. If losing Clark wasn't enough, the Fever also had to navigate the DeWanna Bonner saga, a distracting off-court storyline that could have easily derailed team chemistry, but to their credit, the Fever didn't fold. White has repeatedly credited her team's resilience, saying, "I didn't feel like we played particularly well tonight. But being able to rely on multiple players getting stops when needed, making adjustments, and continuing to grow, I mean, this is a group that's been resilient all season long." That resilience has translated into results. Indiana recently notched its 4th straight win with an impressive victory over the Dallas Wings, marking their longest winning streak of the season and, for the first time since 2015, putting them 4 games over 500. The key has been embracing the challenge of playing without their biggest star. Earlier in the season, White acknowledged the importance of learning to win without Clark, and the team has done just that, going 8-7 in her absence. But even with that respectable record, ESPN analysts remain firm in their belief that the Fever's ceiling rises dramatically when Clark is on the court, with many still considering them a legitimate title contender at full strength. The bigger issue here, however, is not just about one team or one player. It's about whether the WNBA is unintentionally jeopardizing its own long-term success by pushing its athletes to the brink. Expanding the number of games and adding new franchises sounds like progress, but without addressing the underlying infrastructure, larger rosters, smarter scheduling, better travel arrangements, and more built-in recovery time, it risks becoming a case of too much, too soon. Soft tissue injuries, fatigue-related breakdowns, and extended absences from marquee players could erode the very momentum the league has been building. The WNBA has waited years for a crossover star like Caitlin Clark, someone who not only dominates on the court but also commands national attention and draws in casual sports fans. Losing her, even temporarily, doesn't just impact the Fever's playoff hopes. It impacts ratings, sponsorship interest, and the broader narrative around the league. That's why legends like Lisa Leslie and current stars like Satu Sabali have been outspoken about the need for reform. Sabali has openly criticized the compressed schedule, pointing to stretches where teams play 9 games in 18 days, as simply not responsible for a commissioner to approve. Leslie has emphasized that injuries like Clark's require real rest and recovery time, something the current system barely allows. And while some will argue that injuries are simply part of sports, the frequency and nature of these absences suggest a pattern that can't be ignored. The solution may not be as simple as cutting back on games, which would reduce revenue opportunities, but it could mean expanding roster spots to allow for better load management, implementing stricter minute restrictions for players coming back from injury, and ensuring that travel logistics minimize fatigue as much as possible. After all, the WNBA's future depends on its ability to keep its stars healthy and on the court. Fans who tuned in for Caitlin Clark's rookie season weren't just watching the fever, they were watching a player who represents the league's next era. If she and others like her are consistently sidelined, the league risks losing the national spotlight it's worked so hard to capture. For now, Indiana will keep fighting, trying to build toward a deep playoff run while their star recovers. But for the WNBA, the question lingers: is this just part of the natural growing pains of a league on the rise? Or is it a warning sign that growth without balance can be just as dangerous as no growth at all? Either way, the message from players, coaches, and analysts is clear. It's time to start valuing recovery and sustainability as much as expansion and exposure. Because the future of the league might just depend on it.